This graphic breaks down the armies on June 18, 1576. On the right, the Mughal Empire's war machine, up to 10,000 men, complete with heavy artillery and armored elephants. On the left, Maharana Pratap's defending Mewar forces, just 3,400 soldiers. The Mughal mandate from Emperor Akbar was absolute: capture Pratap alive, execute him, or force his kingdom into total surrender. To meet those odds in an open field meant certain destruction for the smaller army. Pratap chose to retreat deep into the Aravalli Mountains. By forcing the imperial army to follow him into these jagged ridges, he stripped away their ability to deploy their superior numbers all at once. The trap was set at a highly specific choke point called Haldigati. Named for its bright yellow, turmeric-colored soil, this pass was a claustrophobic bottleneck. It was so tight that invading cavalry units had no choice but to squeeze through in single or double file, packed shoulder to shoulder in the sweltering June heat. And while the Mughals were crammed into that tight space, Pratap utilized the high ground. He deployed 400 native Bhil archers, indigenous masters of this specific terrain. Positioned safely on the inaccessible upper ridges, they waited with their bows drawn, ready to fire downward into the dense enemy ranks. By weaponizing the actual geology of the mountain pass, Pratap transformed the cliffs into a literal force multiplier for his defenders. But Pratap didn't sit back and play defense. The moment the battle began, he launched a high-velocity frontal cavalry charge straight down the throat of the pass. The physical momentum and psychological shock of 3,000 armored Rajput horsemen colliding with the cramped Mughal vanguard physically shattered the imperial front lines. Mughal commanders used their army's massive depth to absorb the blow, establishing a thick wall of musketeers. Then, deploying heavy field artillery, the sheer volume of fire violently forced the Mewar defenders backward, pushing them out of the mountain bottleneck. In a matter of minutes, the geographical advantage of the narrow pass evaporated. Pratap's greatly outnumbered army was completely exposed in the sweltering open plains, an area that would soon be renamed Rakta Talau, the Lake of Blood. Once out in the open, organized military strategy completely dissolved. The battle fractured into intense, chaotic, and brutal hand-to-hand combat. We can see the extreme kinetic energy of this fighting in Pratap's individual duel with a giant, heavily armored Mughal commander named Bahlol Khan. The two men charged each other on horseback. As they collided, Pratap utilized the forward momentum of his galloping stallion and combined it with the dense mass of his broadsword, swinging downward in a single, perfectly aligned arc. The mechanical force of that exact strike was staggering. The blade sliced cleanly through Khan's iron helmet, cut entirely through his armored torso, and bifurcated his warhorse straight down vertical center. Out on the bloody plains, tactical formations no longer mattered. Surviving Raktatalo required pure, unfathomable physical exertion. Seeking a decisive end to the slaughter, Pratap spotted the Mughal commander, Raja Man Singh I. Man Singh was entrenched safely in the center of the imperial line, riding high atop a massive, heavily armored war elephant. Pratap spurred his legendary white stallion, Chetak, directly at the beast. In an unbelievable feat of biomechanics, the stallion generated enough explosive power in his hindquarters to leap upward, planting his front hooves firmly onto the armored face of the war elephant. Suspended in the air, Pratap hurled a heavy steel spear at Man Singh. The commander dodged by a fraction of an inch, and the spear killed his elephant driver instantly. But as Chetak dropped back to the ground, a hidden, razor-sharp sword tied to the elephant's trunk slashed downward, severely severing one of the stallion's hind legs. Seeing their king heavily outnumbered and sitting on a crippled horse, loyal Rajput nobles rushed the line. They forced Pratap to swap cloaks to confuse the Mughal troops, demanding he retreat so the rebellion could continue. The survival of the Mewar resistance now rested entirely on the failing biology of a desperately wounded animal. Chetak was bleeding heavily, running entirely on 3 legs. With Mughal cavalry in hot pursuit, the mutilated stallion carried his master away from the battlefield, pushing his body past total mechanical failure. But the escape route was suddenly blocked by an impossible physical obstacle, a 22-foot-wide mountain stream. Running out of blood and air, Chetak mustered the absolute last surge of adrenaline his heart could produce.
he launched himself across the massive chasm, placing his rider safely beyond the reach of the enemy. The moment his hooves hit the opposite bank, the legendary stallion collapsed. He died right there, resting his head in Maharana Pratap's lap. Chetak's final act of physical sacrifice ensured the survival of the Mewar bloodline. The final results of Haldigati depends entirely on how you define victory. On paper, the Mughal army possessed the battlefield, controlled the pass, and forced a massive retreat. But looking at the imperial mandate, the day was a strategic failure for the Mughal Empire. Emperor Akbar had explicit goals: capture the king or absorb the kingdom. By the end of the slaughter, the imperial army had achieved neither. Instead, Pratap escaped deep into the safety of the Aravalli Hills. From those high ridges, he immediately transitioned his remaining forces into a relentless, highly organized guerrilla campaign. Over the coming years, he utilized mountain ambushes to wear down the Mughal garrisons, eventually taking back almost all of his lost territories. Haldigati catalyzed years of unyielding resistance, proving that losing the physical ground was a small price for the long-term survival of the resistance. This entire movement was built upon a dying horse's refusal to stop running.